So hello fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 6455463728. And I wanted to talk about Joe Rogan's guest, William von Hippel. That's an interesting name. Anyway, this particular episode was on November 2018, so quite a while ago. And speaking of recent episodes or how timely, Joe Rogan was talking to this guy, Owen, and he was saying, well, the guy had just gotten his test, and he was saying that people had been commenting on whether or not he was taking tests from other people, and he was saying, no, that's not the case. The guy was saying how relieved he was because it was kind of like getting an AIDS test, so he just wanted to make sure that, but Joe Rogan was saying that so many people were commenting on on the fact that he was getting people tested, and he pretty much said what we all know based on what people said recently, that everybody that comes in there, they're getting tested, and apparently it's a really quick test. So however they're doing this antibody test, it's really quick. Maybe I'll look it up. Anyway, he was also saying that somebody had mentioned, apparently all these articles were about the comments that people made, and to him that was a surprise. Like, people actually wrote an article about people's comments. I don't think that Joe probably reads a lot of news these days, because that's been a thing for quite a while. I mean, I still comment on the fact that they do that, but they've been doing that for a while as far as I know. For many, many months, if not a year or two, at least, they've been doing that. People are probably going to tell me that they've been doing it probably more or longer than that, but I don't know. Anyway, so Mr. Hippel, von Hippel, interesting guy, and I think two things that I took away from his talk with Joe Rogan was that I didn't know that Homo erectus gave rise to humans and Neanderthals separately in Europe and, Eurasia then. That's pretty interesting. And also that, he reiterated things that I already knew, that Joe might not have known. I don't know if he really absorbed that amount of information, which is that designer babies, no, that's not going to be a thing. Because the genes, there's usually no single gene for intelligence, let's say. There are a lot of genes that contribute 1, 2, 5, 7, 8, 9% towards intelligence. But they also might contribute to something else. They might contribute to, let's say, weakened physical attributes. They might also contribute to hair loss. They might contribute to poor sight. They might constitute... and I'm not saying that those are definite. Those are examples. The idea is that you're not going to be able to genetically engineer a baby definitively with a whole laundry list of traits that you wish your baby would have, because some of them might compete with each other. They might be uncomplimentary to each other. So you want your baby to look good, and at the same time be intelligent, and at the same time be well spoken, and at the same time be very tall. And some of those genes, the fact of the matter is that the amount of influence those genes have are going to be spread out over however many, maybe 50, 100 different genes. And affecting those might affect something else. So there's no clearly defined path to doing that. And it took a little while for Joe to appreciate that he's like, if we have some kind of AI, wouldn't it be able to do that? Well, that would be a very wondrous AI. An AI really that is beyond our understanding, because it's really tricky. And in addition to that, I think William Bill von Hippel, he also mentioned the fact that, again, everybody on the planet is from Africa. Human beings originated in Africa, so we're all originated from Africans. So the idea of race is pretty silly. And I think I might have wanted to do a piece on this separately at some point. But he pointed out something that was very interesting, which is that a European, someone of European descent and someone of Asian descent would be much closer in terms of their genetic diversity, in terms of their genes, than people from two different villages in Africa. Far less East and West Africa or North and South Africa. Just, maybe a couple hundred miles separating them would have higher genetic diversity than a Frenchman and a Japanese person. So the idea is that if you're going to, let's say, talk about race, there might be a Japanese race, let's say, or there might be a European race, but to lump all the other people in Africa into one race would be ludicrous, because they would be more different than this Japanese person that you want to call Asian, and this Caucasian person that you want to call Caucasian or white. That delineation, those particular delineations, are just going to end up being kind of ridiculous. So one other thing that he talked about, and I thought was pretty interesting, was what he called theory of mind. And I've heard of this before, which is that you understand that all knowledge is not available to everyone. That there is such a thing as a mind, and different minds have different knowledge. So for example, a child talking to someone on the phone will say, yes, the cup dropped, not realizing that the other person can't see the cup, and they can't see the mess that was made. Children wouldn't, up to a particular age, they're not able to lie because they don't realize that the other person doesn't understand or doesn't know what they know. And at some point we realize, oh, they might not know this thing that we know. And he had a funny story about it that I'll go into in a second. But I think, at least for me, and I know for everybody else as well, we have this thing where we talk about common sense, and when we're frustrated, we say common sense isn't that common. And I think part of the reason why we say that is because we don't really have as great a theory of mind, as our model of theory of mind isn't that good. It's like me trying to understand how my mother would think, or my sister, or just anybody else. Somebody richer than me, someone poorer than me. How could someone think that this was okay? I'm sure all of us have said at some point. The problem is, clearly, they do. Clearly, we have completely different points of view, that we look at other people and can't understand how they would think that this other thing that we don't agree with is okay, and they're comfortable with it. And I suppose, just like race, common sense is a fictitious thing. It's not real. I've spoken, and I'm sure other people have spoken to individuals who would think, oh, my life is so boring, nobody would care or want to know about anything that's in my life, nothing interesting happens. And those people don't realize that everybody has something interesting, especially to somebody else. I mean, in terms of, somebody will be like, yeah, well, I grew up at a zoo, and there were all these animals, but it's not really any big deal. And we would look at them like, what? You grew up in a zoo? Your parents had a zoo? And you think that that is boring? How the heck could you think that that would be boring? Do you think everybody else grew up in a zoo? And some people just never thought about it. They just never thought that, waking up in the morning and hearing a lion roar was unusual, because it's incredibly boring to them, because they've done it their whole life. And this might be something like, Life of Pi, for example. In case you don't know, his family had a zoo in that movie. And there's so many other instances where somebody might have grown up in a circus, or someone might have grown up with their grandparents. And to them, oh yeah, I grew up with my grandparents, no big deal. But there's certain aspects of that are a big deal, that might be quite interesting. But because they have not known anything else, they kind of feel like everybody else knows and appreciates that too. And it's the same thing with things that we believe to be common sense. Oh, everybody knows that. How could you fall for that thing? Or, how was I supposed to know this? When you might be one of the few people who might not know that. Everybody else might know it. So, I think that, and the whole idea of race, different races, it's really kind of silly, because if human beings started out in Africa, and we would know, I mentioned this in a joke. When people were leaving Africa, there is no gatekeeper who is going to say, okay, we have an IQ test for you. This is not like, what's the name of that movie? It's a Monty Python movie, where when you're at a particular point in their quest, somebody asked them, what's the wing speed of a swallow? And if you didn't know, you would be thrown to your death. And so they asked the person, so what is the average wing speed of a swallow? And the person said, African or European? And the person who asked the question, he said, I don't know. So he was thrown to his death. Whoa! So that was quite funny. Actually, if you've never seen Monty Python movies, depending on your taste, I find them to be pretty funny. The series itself, maybe not so funny, but the movies, pretty funny. They put a lot of work into those things. And it's really interesting to see, is it John Cleese? Is he still alive, talking about those things? That guy has a big gut. So I'm recently on a talk show. I'm surprised that he's still alive. I have to look up his age, because he has a human and a half right there with him wherever he goes. But overall, was a good, enjoyable podcast. I learned from it. I learned, for example, that Mr. von Hippel only likes fruits and meat, doesn't like leafy green vegetables, broccoli and that sort of thing. And Joe was like, don't be like a little kid. And he was pulling his leg and stuff. But it was funny. Anyway, wish me lucks. You can like or unlike. You can subscribe and or share. And of course, you can do nothing. Peace.